Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Sorry, I'm streaming a little early tonight, and I also think I neglected to stream to DLive by accident. So this is an exclusive unauthorized stream. I'm told the audio and the video is good. Rabid puppies are in the house. And we're going to talk about a lot of people's favorite subject, which is, of course, the boomers. And I entitled this to hear the boomer is to hate the boomer. And we'll probably have a post put up and on the blog in the next day or three. But this was inspired recently by some conversations on Gab between Space Bunny and a bunch of boomers. Now, I'm not jumping in to defend Space Bunny. She's a big girl. She's perfectly capable of defending herself, as we know. But, it was just unbelievable how there was no recognition whatsoever of why they were being criticized. No reference, no understanding whatsoever that anybody might possibly have a genuine case against them. This is I made a couple memes with AI. This was a pretty good one. I ended up using a different one, which you can see on Gab or wherever. But this, it's a bit of a play on the whole "this is fine" meme. The boomers have been descending into the fires of hell pretty much since their teen years, and yet they think everything's fine. They're convinced everything's fine. They're convinced that they were not only among the most fortunate of generations, which they were, but that everything they were doing was totally appropriate, totally admirable, and certainly beyond any reasonable or legitimate criticism. So, I'm going to read you some things that they had to say here. Actually, I'm going to put this in a different. Maybe I can zoom it in. Let me see if I can zoom this in. Yeah, I can. That's good. Okay. So it's been interesting to see the different forms of defense that are erected. One of the new ones, one of the relatively new ones, is this idea that if you're criticizing the boomers, if you're using the term boomer, or also Karen, or a few other insults of that nature, you're doing so because you're falling into the trap of being anti-white. Now, this is probably one of the dumbest attempts to evade criticism I've ever seen or heard of. And I think it's particularly ironic is I don't think it's the boomers who came up with it. It's the alt-retards. But, and of course it just gives them one more thing to posture and pose about. If you haven't figured it out by now, the average alt-retard is somebody who correctly doesn't like the direction that Clown World is taking, but they're too enamored of shocking people and trying to stir up a reaction. So they basically want to have an excuse to attack anyone and everyone who isn't going to get a swastika tattoo and denounce whoever they want them to denounce. So now nobody pays them any attention for the most part, except the ADL. And so they have to jump in and sort of broaden their case in order to generate interest. So what I wrote and what I posted on Gab was defending boomers and trying to ex post facto redefine boomer as an anti-white slur is one way to ensure that virtually no Gen X or millennial will ever pay any attention to you. Because we were there, obviously speaking for Gen X here, we saw what they consciously chose from our earliest years. We lived in the white America that they smugly rejected and ruined. The boomers collectively were and are a wicked generation. The fact that evil influence exists does not excuse in any way those who chose evil new ways in preference to that which is traditional and good. And if you are defending boomers and their choices, then you are an enemy of the good, the beautiful, and the true. I mean, this is obvious. Both these things are obvious. You can't say, the Jew made me do it. The devil made me do it. Well, you can say it, but it doesn't excuse your actions. It doesn't erase your culpability for your actions. And it certainly doesn't eliminate the consequences of your actions. Everyone is responsible for whom they choose to follow. The boomers chose one path. We have chosen a different path. So that was what I wrote. Not terribly objectionable, I think. You might have a quibble of one or two things. You might, want to defend against the notion that they're a wicked generation. But other than that, there's not really much that's controversial there, you might think. But what was kind of funny was that here are just a sum of the responses. And now keep in mind, these are people who are responding on Gab. So they're fairly right-wing, some flavor of conservative. And also note that the likes versus dislikes, the ratio, was 10-to-1 positive. Now you would think that those opinions being expressed, those realities being expressed, Ironic Keyboard says even-handed for sure. It wasn't a particularly incendiary post. And you would think that the fact that there's a 10-to-1 like to dislike ratio might give potential commenters some degree of pause before leaping in and expressing some sort of angry critique of something that obviously a lot of people feel is reasonable, a lot of people agree with, and so forth. But we're dealing with boomers here. Didn't even slow them down. I disagree. It's only the leftist cucky boomers, Democrat boomers. The ones on the right wing are disgusted that the younger generations are pussies. Okay. I'm a boomer, and if I understand this, you are a fucking moron. I thought that was kind of funny. If I understand this, you're stupid. Okay. I don't give two fucks what some milquetoast basement dwelling disrespectful turds that needs their ass whipped thinks. Hell, you idiots don't even know what sex you are. And they're not man buns, they're bitch biscuits. Fuck off, punks. I mean, the thing that's crazy about boomers is that having ignored Generation X pretty much throughout their adult lives, even even when even when they were our parents, they literally needed to be reminded, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? I mean, occasionally people say, we loved our kids just as much as you did. We're like, they literally had to invent a word to describe the way that you were leaving them alone in a way that no previous generation had. You know, latchkey children. And so the guy is responding to a 55-year-old Gen Xer with no conception that he's not a 18-year-old Zoomer with a man bun. They literally know nothing about us. They still know nothing about us. There's a woman, I think she's 56 now. She's a comedian, obviously not a big time Netflix embraced comedian, which you'll understand on the basis of her humor, which is pretty wholesome. You know, she's 55 and married, and she talks about, you know, Gen X and boomers and that sort of stuff, and marriage and so forth, instead of talking about her body parts and her sexual escapades. So, you know, she's not an approved modern female comic. And I wouldn't even say that she's particularly funny, but what she does do is she tells the truth. And I think the whole routine about her being sent out to buy cigarettes for her mother when she was 9 years old is pretty funny. And it's probably, you know, pretty shocking. You know, a lot of the stuff that that Gen X remembers from our childhood is kind of shocking and sounds kind of shocking in the modern context. But you have to remember, we never saw anything wrong with it. That was the only thing we knew. You know, so it was perfectly fine to be locked out of your house all Saturday. It was perfectly fine for your parents to have absolutely no idea where you were. I mean, just to put it in perspective, we literally used to play on the train tracks. You know, there's a train tracks that ran behind our next door neighbor's house. And, you know, we used to, when it would come to a stop, you know, we'd climb up onto the flat cars and then, you know, ride it and then jump off before it got going too fast. You know, it never occurred to anybody to say, hey, maybe don't play on the train tracks. You know, I mean, we all knew about the risks in, you know, our neighbor's dog got cut in half by it. So it wasn't like we were, you know, trying to do something dangerous or anything. It was just, it was fun. It was there. You know, we thought we were really lucky to have a train tracks that we could play on so close. You know, you know, sometimes you'd find a loose spike and you could like take it home for your for your collection. You know, we all had railroad spikes in our bedrooms. I have no idea what we thought we were going to do with them, but you know, hey, free railroad spike. And the thing is that, you know, in some ways, it was good. You know, not all of our, you know, we don't look back on those times and we're not horrified by them. We had a great time, generally speaking. I was really, I was really sorry. We bought a house that in a neighborhood before we had kids, and I thought it'd be really good because it was next door to my best friend and his wife, and um, and we were thinking that it'd be great because there's like a sort of a cul-de-sac so the kids could play there and everything. And my wife said, well, she said, I feel kind of like you're trying to recreate your childhood for our hypothetical kids. She said, you need to understand it's not going to happen. It's not going to be like that. I said, why not? I mean, why wouldn't it be? And she said, well, first of all, it's not necessarily going to be anywhere nearly as many kids because the age people were not all moving into the neighborhoods at the same time. The neighborhoods weren't all just being built, right? And then the other thing is that she said that kids just don't play outside the way they used to. And she was a nanny; she knew. You fewer kids, bigger houses, bigger yards, parents that actually had some interest in keeping an eye on their kids, that kind of thing. Um, I mean, the downside of it was that when you did get hurt, it was often very difficult to get the adults to pay attention to it. You know, it wasn't at all uncommon for for parents to basically tell you to shake it off. The whole classical, oh, just rub some dirt on it or whatever. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration. What's not an exaggeration is having to try to talk parents into taking you to the hospital with broken bones. You know, I can remember trying to talk my, how old would I would have been about 9. I remember trying to talk my mother into taking my younger brother to the hospital one evening because he had broken his collarbone. I mean, you could literally see that the one collarbone was not, obviously at 9 years old, I was not a doctor, but you could see that the collarbone was clearly snapped, and he was in pain. Um, and she's like, "Oh, he'll be fine." I'm like, "He's not gonna be fine." Finally after half an hour, she's like, "Oh, okay." I mean, it's almost comical when you compare it to our quote unquote helicopter parenting, where, you know, Maddie, I said, sounds like he wanted attention. Yeah, and you know what he was doing? He'd been playing hockey. I mean, I mean, the possibility of breaking something while you're playing hockey is non-zero, right? So anyhow, it was just looking back. It's both mildly appalling and totally comical. Yeah. Anyhow, let me read a few more of these. Okay, be a divider, be alone, forget history, be a Cretan, as in someone who lives on the island of Crete. Let's see how that works for you when you die alone. You are a spoiled brat who has mommy, daddy, grandparent issues. Get the mental help that you deserve. Grow up and quit being divisive post after post about your daddy issues. Instead, post the names of the controller rat bastards who are making laws, regulations, codes that destroy the freedoms you say you want. In reality, you are just ranting about your family, and the dysfunction you vent is your own and theirs, not mine, not anyone else's. So piss off tired of your freaking unhinged rants about boomers. You will fail because you are using the Frankfurt school of propaganda of divide and conquer, you childish putz. You should be shunned. Now, here's the thing. If it's my family issues, if it's my daddy issues, then how come practically every freaking member of Generation X that you talk to who is within 7 years of my age says exactly the same thing and knows exactly what I'm talking about? Right? And I'm not saying that children today are not too coddled. I'm not saying that children today are not indisciplined, you know. And I'm not saying that the way that we were raised was even that bad. You know, we turned out fine for the most part. But here's the point. The point is that was the first indication of something that we have seen ever since, which is the boomers are the first generation that didn't give a damn about the subsequent generations. It wasn't their goal to give their children better lives than they had themselves. I mean, they weren't against it. They weren't actively against it. But they were more concerned about whatever their perceived interests were. Self-interests. You know, I've said before, the biggest single mistake that I ever made was not dropping out of university halfway through my sophomore year. I had a product. We had a design for it. We actually had working prototypes of it. And I did not have the courage, let's say, to drop out of school and do that against the active opposition of my parents. Why? Because it was more important, especially to my mother, that I get a degree. Now, that whatever harm that did was pretty much just financial, right? It wasn't really a major thing. But that same fascination with education, that same boomer need for signs of societal success is why a lot of young women never got married, never had children, because they were constantly being pushed. You need to have a good education. You need to have a good job. You need to be able to support yourself in case your husband leaves you and you get divorced. You know. And I'm not saying that the individuals who bought into that nonsense are any less culpable than the boomers themselves were for the nonsense that they were taught. But the point is, look what they were teaching. Look what they were pushing. That was not what our grandparents were pushing. That's not what their parents, their great-grandparents' generation. From beginning to end, and literally now. Look at what happened with COVID. They were more than willing to sacrifice their grandchildren because they believed it would make them safer from COVID. There was never any need whatsoever for anyone under the age of 30 to get vaccinated. Now, granted, it was also bad for everybody else to get vaccinated. But there wasn't even a potential positive reason for even people who believed the vaccines were perfectly safe we're willing to admit, yeah, the only reason to vaccinate the kids is to save their grandparents. This is exactly the opposite of what a healthy society does. A healthy society sacrifices the interests of the elderly for the youngest generation, sacrifices the interests of the parents for the children. You know, even animals sacrifice the interests of the parents for the children. A lot of the boomer behavior didn't even rise to the level of an animal. That's the truth. Here's a few more comments. You're a special kind of retarded, son. Label not all for the stupidity and arrogance of the few. I have despised and worked against those dirty pony-tailed long-haired commies my whole damn life. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, punk. You must be either blind or indescribably stupid. Do you not understand English? How dare you smear me, a staunch conservative, of all the shit the lefties and communists have perpetrated against my country? You are wasting my valuable time and evidently cannot distinguish between enemies and allies. I'm done with you and your ilk. The fight for freedom will be rendered futile due to fools like you. What did he ever conserve? What did boomer conservatives ever accomplish? They didn't even conserve the ladies' room. How dare you? That was a total, how dare you? I'm a little disappointed that he didn't work that in there somewhere. We put men on the moon. The thing you have to understand is that actual boomers don't usually, they're not really as, I mean, the whole moon thing is Owen's thing. He's not wrong. They do all believe in the NASA and the moon and all that sort of thing. But in my experience, they do tend to get a lot more worked up about music, Woodstock, and they really, really hate millennials. You know, that, like I said, with Gen X, they don't even, they still don't register Gen X. That woman, comedian that I was telling you about, she's a Southerner from Georgia. She was amused by the fact that Time magazine did this big cover story on the generations of America. And it literally went, greatest silent boomer, millennial, zoomer. Like, they literally forgot to put Generation X in their big story. You know, surprise, surprise. You know how to tell a millennial or zoomer? And I mean, there's just another example, like right here. You know how to tell a millennial or zoomer? You can't tell them shit because they blame all their shitty life decisions on somebody else. Now pay my student loan and give me a fucking participation trophy. It's just crazy how the idea that there might be any legitimacy to the younger generation's opinions, feelings, issues is totally beyond them. I mean, I'm an economist by training. My family was, quite wealthy when I was in college. I was fortunate. My parents paid for, my entire private university. I have no student loans. I have no loans, period. My dad always taught me, don't borrow money. So I didn't. But because I advocate the elimination of all student loan debt, every single freaking boomer thinks that I'm a millennial with big student loan debt that I just want to get out from under. They always say, get a job and pay it off yourself. I'm like, I have a job. I have a job. I've never had a student loan. What are you talking about? How is that response? I am saying you need to, if you want to ever sell your houses before you die, you had better allow, you better wipe out all that student loan debt so that people can actually afford to take out a mortgage. You know, they've enslaved two generations, partially enslaved my generation, but they really, really screwed over the millennials, and they really, really screwed over the Zoomers to such an extent that all the smart young Zoomer men, especially in the States, are not going to university. They're going to trade school, they're going to community college, they're finding ways around the student debt system, which is smart, which is wise. You know, I know very, very highly intelligent individuals, you know, they're not going to a 4-year university. They're not taking out any student loan debt. They're getting into the trades. And these are people that could easily get into and succeed at an Ivy League school. But they're not allowing themselves to be put into debt slavery, which frankly is passing the IQ test as far as I'm concerned. But the boomer cannot imagine that somebody of my generation who doesn't have any of those problems would be empathetic toward these younger people with these problems and seek to advocate for them. That doesn't even register with your average boomer. Which brings us to the next comment. There you go, generalizing again. Well, we're talking about well over 100 million people. If you're going to talk about a generation, you are by definition going to generalize, because obviously the normal behavior is not going to apply to the outliers. When you're talking about 160 million people, then there's probably tens of millions who don't behave that way. That's not the point. When you're talking about a generation, it is a macro discussion. We're dealing in statistics. We're dealing with average observable behavior. It's not an accident that the divorce rate went down with Generation X. You know, it's still too high, but it went down a lot. It went down noticeably. Abortion went down quite a bit. You know, we didn't want that. You know, we didn't have the answers, but we knew that the previous generation, not only, we didn't like their answers. You know, and yes, you know, we are too apathetic, we are too nihilistic, etc., etc. All of those criticisms are 100% legitimate. They definitely apply to me, they apply to my wife, they apply to most of my friends, without question. Generalizations are based on observable macro level facts. Nevertheless, whoa, so many mommy and daddy issues here. Right, because the only reason you would ever criticize the boomers is because of your own personal issues. As it happens, my mother and my father are not boomers. You know, they were both born during the war. I'm not saying that they didn't, you know, pick up any boomer habits, but they were always better. They were always better than the boomers. They were always better than their, you know, slightly younger friends who were full blown, full blown stereotypes. Blaming on one generation is the easy way out. You're a bitter person who's blaming others for your own failures. Be responsible. Look deeper. Okay. What do my failures have to do with the price of college? What do my failures have to do with the massive amount of debt slavery that tens of millions of younger people are in? Nothing. All of their responses are attempts to deflect because they don't have any answer. They don't have any reasonable response. They don't have any defense. What type of empty weirdo takes such pride in their generation? Well, I think that for most boomers, they identify personally with it. They identified as a new type of culture, a new type of country, etc., etc. And they were apparently significantly coddled by their parents who wanted to, and this shows the danger. Their parents wanted to give them a better world, but they didn't give them they didn't train them properly. They didn't raise them correctly. And so, sins of the fathers and all that. But the point isn't to say that everyone else is perfect. Everyone else was made the right choices. That's not true. Obviously that's not the case. But the point is, it's incumbent upon us to absolutely reject the boomer path, because we know that the boomer path leads straight to hell on earth and hell thereafter. Anthony says, almost seems like the boomers switched racial and religious identity for generation identity. I think they did. Test it out. If you criticize a boomer and then you criticize their racial and their religious identity, be interesting to see which one triggers them the most. I would bet that with the average boomer, they get more hot under the collar having their generational identity attacked than having either their racial or their religious identity attacked. Identity is a very, very powerful force, and that's one of the reasons, of course, why it was so important for those who wanted to destroy America to attack the very concept of American identity. They stripped away what was American, which is basically a colonial British identity, and they transformed it into, well, anybody who thinks that these ideas are neat or wants to live there. It's total nonsense. Codex wants to play devil's advocate. Generalizations and noticing are so fraught, people overreact where they can. I don't think so. I mean, do you get set off when people generalize about Christians? I doubt it. Their enemy no longer knew themselves. I'm not sure who you're talking about. The boomers' enemy didn't? But either way, we're where we are. And the boomers are going to cease to be a problem in the next 2 decades. Their day has already passed. Again, look at the ratio, the 10-to-1 ratio in support of my criticisms, you know, the younger generations, you know, they can barely, they don't, they've turned it into such a term of dismissal and contempt that they don't really even know what a boomer is, per se. I've had to teach my, you know, I've had to teach some of the younger ones, never ever call anybody from Gen X a boomer. It will seriously piss them off, you know. And it was kind of funny. Um, I can still remember when I first became conscious that there was just something odd about the previous generation. The first bare whiff of it was when Kathy Hilgers, sorry, yeah, Kathy Hilgers at my elementary school, we finished up fourth grade, and then she came back and her name was Kathy Gasolin, which of course was promptly transformed into Kathy Gasoline, as you can imagine, by a group of fifth graders. Um, and I remember that and she was a cute girl. She was one of the prettier girls in our elementary school, in our class. But I remember that she went from being, kind of a normal, maybe a little bit stuck up girl, to being one that just was a little bit more reserved and just seemed to be a little bit sad. And I asked her once. I said, "Why did your name? Why did you? Why did you change your name?" And she said, "Well, my parents got divorced." And I didn't even know what it was. Like, like, what do you mean divorce? She said, "Well, um, they're not married anymore." And of course, having been, raised in a Christian home and um, living in a middle class suburb where everybody was married, um, and having been to a few weddings, and you know, only God can break it apart and so forth. I didn't know. My immediate reaction was, they can do that. You know, it's amazing how innocent children can be. But that was just the first like bare whiff of like what's going on. I don't get it, right? And then the first time that I really consciously grasped that boomers had actually, as they boasted, changed the world was, we were, the music that we would listen to was a bit different. Um, I liked the late 70s, early 80s guitar rock stuff, Kansas and the Babies and AC/DC and all that sort of thing. I liked it, but it wasn't our music the way that the Police and Duran Duran and the Cars and B-52s and all that kind of stuff, But it seemed a little strange that, all of these things started coming out, like 40 is the new 20, you know? And I remember thinking, how is 40 the new 20? I mean, if you're 40, you're 40, right? Um, and I remember even joking at the time, and this is like when we first realized that there was something up with these people. I said, that they're gonna, when they turn 50, it's gonna be 50 is the new 30. And the thing is, now they're doing stuff like sexy at 70, you know. 80 and erotic. It's the kind of thing that, I mean, it was a literal joke to us 40 years ago, and they're still doing it. They're still doing it. Also, I think PJ O'Rourke, who's a boomer himself, actually pointed out. Ironic Keyboard says they're perpetual teenagers, can't explain why. Well, he did point out something that I thought was interesting. He said he was talking about like the people his age who are he called them ponytailed professors, and he said they're still wearing jeans and t-shirts and the same type of clothes that they wore back when they were in college. And he said, to put this in perspective, that would be like our professors wearing zoot suits. Like somehow they just froze in time. Now it's interesting to think about because there's a lot of people who think that era, I mean it's frozen in time for a reason. It was very idyllic in its own way. That that summer of '65 type thing. I mean, that was probably in a number of ways the peak of the teenage experience. There was still some level of innocence that my generation didn't have. There was still demographic homogeneousness that, again, even in Minnesota, my generation didn't have by the time we were in high school, definitely in college. We have a super chat here from thank you. It says, just a donation, haven't caught a stream in a while. Well, thank you very much. That's the first super chat tonight. The Codex says, older people look surprisingly soft and youthful physically, well into 30s and 40s now. Weird. Well, I mean, they're super soft because they're not because they're overweight. They've got layers of fat on them that most people didn't have for all of human history. Might have something to do with that. It's kind of funny. We know so much more now that you can stay in much better shape than was possible. My father is 80 and he's still doing pull-ups. He's got more hair than I do. He's I mean, he'll go into the garden and spend the entire afternoon. I mean, he's got more stamina for that kind of work to this day than I do or than his grandkids do. So it's possible if you eat right and exercise right, you can stay in much, much better shape than people believe possible. You look at Tom Brady playing at a very high level in his mid 40s. I mean, I'm 55 and I'm playing with teammates 23 years younger on my veterans team. And I'm in numerous cases playing the whole game on the wing. It's a lot of running up and down and up and down. Although unfortunately, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I did get a potentially serious injury that I was briefly concerned might end my soccer career. Fortunately, it turns out that I didn't hurt the ligaments. Ligaments are fine, 100%. And so it looks like it's really annoying to hurt yourself 5 minutes from the end of the season. But I'll find out later this week for sure. But the specialist has already checked it out and looks like should make a full recovery within another 3 weeks or so. So, um, and I can walk, I can stretch, I could probably run if I wanted to. I'm just taking it easy, taking it slow for once. um, so we do have the ability, and yet there's so much. Somebody pointed out all the environmental estrogens now. Although I'm not sure that they were as bad now as they used to be, because I think there used to be a lot more women on the pill than there are now. But wow, Maddie, I said my 91-year-old granddad just built a back deck. Silent Generation crushes. Yeah, they are really good. They are really good in that way. My um, my grandfather uh, just created this whole beautiful set of Japanese uh, paths, like basically like I don't know how they make it. It's like just sweeping the grass or something, or sweeping the ground down to the packed dirt, and it always looks so great, and just had this magical garden with these paths that he had all made himself. I can't even fathom doing that. Cliff Cosmic sends a super chat. Thank you. He says, "Are boomers uniquely vulnerable to media manipulation compared to preceding generations?" Well, I think they are compared to subsequent generations. I think that they got addicted to TV and were influenced by a much smaller range of televised propaganda than subsequent generations. You know, I'm among the oldest of the video game generations. You know, um, people who are even like 1 or 2 years older than me didn't play vids, didn't play computer games. Um, my dad was in the computer field, so we had computers, and so I had access in a way that a lot didn't. Even people my age. I can remember having the star player on my soccer team came over and spent the night, and he was just mystified by, uh, you know, like I'm showing him these different games and stuff, and they had no appeal for him then. They were still unusual enough at that point. That would have been 1984. So I mean, the games were there, but they weren't ubiquitous. Everybody didn't play them yet. I remember thinking that things had really changed a bit when uh, I was just graduated from college, and I was dating a girl who was still in high school, and uh, in my defense, I'd actually met her at a club, so I thought she was older than she was when I met her. Um, but anyhow, uh, I wasn't. She'd come over, and I wasn't ready, so I needed to like shower something. And she said, "Oh, okay, I'll just play Nintendo while I wait." And I remember looking at her, going, "What?" You know, I mean, I had not met a single girl my age who ever played video games, much less voluntarily on her own. You know, that's when I realized, huh, these things are getting really big. You know, so, um, but the point is that the influences on Generation X were wider than they were on the boomers. The boomers were affected by, 3 TV channels, all of which were saying practically the same thing. And um, so that's uh, my suspicion is that part of their hive mind is because the range of their propagandistic influences was much, much narrower, and they were I think more susceptible to it because it wasn't something that they had any defenses against. I think by the time we came along, there was already reason to be more cynical about things. About you were less willing to trust either the politicians or the media. Yeah, I mean that's part of where our apathy, our generational apathy and nihilism comes from, is because we didn't trust any of the. It wasn't just like, oh, the boomers were like, we don't trust our parents, but we believe everything that the television says. We're kind of like, we trust our parents more than anything. We don't trust them that much, and we really don't trust anything else. You know, so. Um, Anyhow, you know, this is where the more the ironic thing is that the more you hear the boomers talk, the more you actually listen to what they have to say, the more you really come to hate everything they stand for. And so, um, the reason that it's good to hate the boomer is not because of who they are, it's because of what they represent. And that path of mindless narcissistic materialism has to be rejected. And the idea that he who dies with the most toys wins, spending my kids' inheritance, that's outright wicked. The Bible specifically says a good man lays up inheritance for his children and his children's children. That's what a good man does. So if you've got a generation that is actively disinterested in that, well, that's a wicked generation. In other news, Autark, there's a post on the blog if you want to check it out. Autark has been kicked off of Reddit, which frankly I think is probably to their benefit. But if you feel like supporting them, they've got a Kickstarter going. I'm backing it. We've got some. We're very, very close to finishing Alt Hero Q, and we've got a brand new comic artist that I'm very much looking forward to introducing you guys to. Let me see if I can. Here, let me see if he emailed me some work. Let me see if I can pop it up for you. See if I can find it quickly enough. Okay, let's see here. So, let's see. Okay, I found something. Let's see if I can find some more colored stuff. All right, well, I'm just going to grab one of these instead. It's not one of the colored ones, but at least I don't think it is. Drat. It's not what I was looking for. One of these days I'm going to get organized and actually put this stuff up where I can find it more easily. But all right, well, anyhow, we'll do it next time. I want to show the colored work because it's really good. But anyhow, we'll have the interesting thing is that until about 6 months ago, we had a lot of problems with trying to find top quality illustrators because some just flat out wouldn't work for us. I mean, Renato Ray, who did a really good job on Silenciosa and finishing Chuck Dixon's Avalon, just basically came out and said, I can't work with you guys anymore. And it's probably because he wasn't going to be able to continue working with some of the established houses if he did work for us. But now we're finding that nobody cares because obviously things are not going so well for IDW and Dark Horse and Marvel and so forth. So now people are just they're a lot more interested in just finding work. And so, the success of Arkhaven, the success of Ethan Van Sciver, the success of Eric July is showing them, hey, look, if you want work, you probably shouldn't be trying to police the publishers. So I think that hopefully we're going to be able to add another 2 or 3 really high quality illustrators. And that will, I think, be very beneficial to both Arctoons and Arkhaven in general. So we'll keep you posted on that. And I've ordered all of the backer versions of 7 and 8 Junior Classics, and they should be shipping later this week, and which means they'll probably start going out at the end of next week. So we're getting there, and I will keep you posted. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.